Hello again, friends. I'm back with a brand new story. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Lucas and Scarlett, the most feared alien woman in the galaxy. Buckle up and get ready to dive into the world of science fiction. Enjoy the show. An alien woman accidentally fell into my lap, and she was the most feared alien woman in that galaxy. The drink in front of me was called a sundowner, which was optimistic of everyone involved, because it tasted less like a sunset and more like someone had wrung out an old power cell into a glass and then charged me 9 credits for the experience. I was 3 sips in and committed, the way you get committed to a bad decision once you've already paid for it. That's the whole philosophy of the lower deck of the Vale Andara. If you want it, you've paid, so you might as well finish. The Vale Andara was a spaceport in the loosest possible sense. A great rusted knot of a station drifting at the edge of nowhere, stitched together over 2 centuries from the bones of 100 dead ships, so that walking end to end meant passing through a dozen different eras of somebody else's bad engineering. 100 worlds traded here, mostly in things that didn't care for sunlight. Nobody asked your name. Nobody offered theirs. It was, in its way, the most honest place I'd ever lived, because everyone was lying about exactly the same thing. I fit in beautifully. My name is Lucas. I hauled scrap for a living when there was scrap to haul, and I owed money to 4 separate people, 3 of whom I could describe from memory, and 1 of whom I was quietly hoping had forgotten. My worldly possessions amounted to a coat with more pockets than warmth, a multi-tool held together by faith, and a dull gray data shard on a cord around my neck that I'd won in a card game off a dying man who'd laughed when he lost it. I'd been using it, if I'm honest, mostly as a bottle opener. It had a nice edge. So there I was, nursing my battery acid, minding a business so small it barely qualified as one, when the whole station lurched sideways. Not a gentle lurch. A docking clamp somewhere above us let go with a sound like a god cracking its knuckles, and the deck kicked out from under everyone at once. Glasses jumped off tables. Somebody's soup briefly achieved orbit. The crowd, which had been packed shoulder to shoulder in that lazy, dangerous way crowds pack in places like this, surged all in one direction like water sloshing in a bucket. And out of that surge, out of the smoke and the noise and the general collapse of civil order, a person came flying. She landed across my lap, hard, all at once, knocking the wind out of me and the sundowner off the table, which I'd like the record to show I did not mourn. For a second there was just the shock of it. An elbow near my ribs, the smell of ozone and cold metal, a curtain of dark hair across my face. Then she came up, fast, the way a predator comes up, already turning, already reaching, and I found myself looking into a pair of eyes the color of a warning light, set in a face the deep, burning red of a coal that hasn't yet decided whether to go out, crimson-skinned, breathing fast, and one hand, I noticed with the particular clarity you get right before something bad happens, already wrapped around the hilt of a blade at her hip. She was beautiful the way a drawn weapon is beautiful. And she had long ears, elegant, tapered, sweeping back to fine points like something out of the old fairy stories my mother used to tell, before she gave up on fairy stories and on me, in roughly that order. I opened my mouth to say something charming. This is a lifelong reflex, and it has never once helped me. I didn't get the chance because the deck had gone quiet. Not quieter. Quiet. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses on your ears. 100 people who a moment ago had been shouting and haggling and spilling soup were suddenly, all of them, deeply interested in the floor, the ceiling, their own hands, anywhere at all that wasn't her. I watched a smuggler 2 tables over, a man I'd personally seen bite through a restraining bolt, go pale and very slowly set down his cup so it wouldn't make a sound. That was when I understood, in the cold, sinking way you understand you've just stepped off a ledge, exactly whose lap this woman had chosen. I didn't know her face. You didn't know her face. That was rather the point of her. But I knew the shape of a room emptying itself of courage, and there was only one name that did that across 3 systems. A name people said the way you'd say a curse, quickly, and then glanced over their shoulder to be sure they hadn't summoned it. The warlord the bounty hunters prayed never to find, because the ones who found her didn't come back to file the paperwork. Scarlett. She should have been gone already. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Someone like her, Someone who'd survived long enough to become a story. Should have been off my lap and swallowed by the crowd before I'd finished flinching. The exits were right there. The chaos was perfect cover. Every instinct honed across a lifetime of being hunted should have put her 3 corridors away by now. Instead, she stayed. A heartbeat too long. Then another. She was looking at me. No, not at me. Her gaze had dropped, snagged on something, gone very still. It took me a stupid moment to follow it down to the dull gray shard hanging against my collarbone. The bottle opener. The thing I'd won off a laughing dead man. And the most feared woman in the galaxy, the warlord 3 systems couldn't sleep for fear of, went absolutely rigid, staring at a piece of junk on a scrap hauler's neck like she'd just seen a ghost she'd spent years chasing. When she raised her eyes back to mine, something had changed in them. The threat was still there, sure. But underneath it was something I never in 100 lifetimes expected to find on that face. Something that stood the hair up on my arms worse than the blade had. She looked caught. For one long, impossible second, the deadliest creature in 3 systems sat frozen in the lap of a man who owed money to 4 people, and looked at him as though he were the one who'd finally cornered her. Then behind her, near the corroded archway that passed for a main entrance, 2 figures in the clean gray of conquered uniforms shouldered onto the deck, and I felt her whole body change against mine. Coil. Decide. Don't, she said. The first word she'd spoken. Low and rushed and not remotely a request. Her hand left the blade and closed around my wrist like a docking clamp that actually worked. Don't say anything clever, and do not let go of that. Let go of Weich. On your feet. She was already rising, already hauling me up with her, and the gray uniforms were already turning our way. Congratulations, Junkman. As of this exact second, you are the single most valuable piece of salvage in this galaxy, and I am the only reason you're going to live long enough to enjoy owning it. There is a particular way of running that you only learn in places like the Vial and Dara, where the corridors were designed by people who hated corridors. You keep your shoulder near the wall, you never fully trust the floor, and you assume every door is either sealed, on fire, or both. I knew that run. I'd done it from creditors. What I had never done it from was a squad of conquered enforcers while being towed by the wrist like a very confused kite. But the body adapts. So, I managed, as we banked hard around a fuel line thick as a tree. Is this a robbery? Because I want to set expectations. There's 9 credits in my coat and one of them's a foreign coin I'm not sure is real money. Left, Scarlett said. We went left. Behind us, the gray uniforms came around the corner in that horrible, unhurried Concord way. The way that says we don't need to run. There's nowhere you can go, which is a lie they've clearly all been trained to believe, and it works on them harder than it works on you. Because if it's a kidnapping, I went on, because my mouth does not have a survival mode, I feel honor-bound to tell you the ransom market on me is soft. My own mother would haggle. She'd try to trade me back for store credit. Does it ever stop? She asked, not even winded. The talking. Is there a valve? It's a coping mechanism. It came free with the anxiety. We hit a maintenance stair, and she took it 3 at a time, and I took it however I could, which was mostly by falling downward in a controlled and dignified fashion. A shot went past. Not a bullet, a lance of white light that turned a handrail into slag and filled the stairwell with the clean, sharp smell of vaporized metal. That, more than anything she'd said, recalibrated me. You can tell yourself a lot of comforting stories about a woman gripping your wrist. You cannot tell yourself many about a plasma bolt. Okay, I said, and I heard my own voice come out an octave higher and about 40% more sincere. Okay, that's real. That's a real thing that's happening to me. Down here. She hauled me off the stair into a service crawl that opened, impossibly, onto a private berth, the kind of berth you don't get on the Vale and Dara, unless you have paid someone a frightening amount of money to look the other way with real commitment. And sitting in it was a ship. I'd hauled scrap off 1,000 ships. I knew hulls the way some men know horses. This one was long and low and dark, and wrong in all the right ways. A matte black wedge that seemed to drink the berth lights rather than reflect them, with lines that whispered military and modifications that screamed don't. It was the single most dangerous-looking thing I had ever stood next to, and I'd once stood next to my last landlord. "Nightjar," Scarlett said, slapping a panel. "Open. Now. Company." A ramp dropped. A voice came out of the ship, dry, unbothered, faintly aristocratic, the vocal equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Company, how lovely. And you've brought a guest, a whole entire person. Shall I set an extra place, or is he the sort of guest we normally leave in the vacuum?" "He's cargo," Scarlett said, shoving me up the ramp. "He's talking cargo," said the ship with visible disappointment. "I have a name," I said. "It's Lucas. Hi. It has a name," the Nightjar informed the universe. "Delightful. Do let me know if you'd like it kept." The ramp sealed behind us with a hiss and a very final clunk, and then there was the whole business of leaving. Scarlett dropping into a pilot's seat and doing violent, competent things to a console while the enforcers reached the berth and put more of those white lances into the hull, which the hull absorbed with a sound like disappointed thunder. Docking clamps blew. The berth fell away. And then came the shove, the deep gut drop of hard acceleration, the Veil Andara shrinking on the aft screen from a station to a knot to a smear of light, and then to nothing at all, just black. Just the enormous, indifferent black with its scatter of cold stars, and no gray ships behind us because the Nightjar had folded a little bit of local space and stepped through it the way you'd step over a puddle. I sat down on the floor. It seemed like the honest thing to do. "Right," I said, when I trusted my voice. "I'd like some answers now. I feel I've earned a modest number of answers." Scarlett turned in the seat. Up close, with the adrenaline draining and the ship's soft light on her, she looked less like a legend and more like a person who hadn't slept properly in about a year. That red skin, those long, tapered ears swept back, and under the ferocity, a tiredness so deep it had its own gravity. She studied me the way you'd study a tool you weren't sure you'd need. "You really don't know who I am," she said. It wasn't a question. It seemed to genuinely puzzle her. "You landed on me pretty fast. We skipped the introductions." "Scarlett." She said it flatly, and watched my face, and I watched hers, and I did the thing where you laugh a little because the alternative is worse. "Scarlett," I repeated. As in, the Scarlet. The one they don't say out loud. The warlord. I gestured vaguely. "The reason bounty hunters take up farming." "That's the one." "Right. Great. Wonderful." I put my head briefly against the cool bulkhead. "And I'm on your ship. Because of this." I lifted the dull gray shard on its cord, the bottle opener, the card game prize, the thing she'd gone rigid over. "Which is, and I want to be clear, garbage. I won it off a dying man. I've been opening drinks with it." Something crossed her face then, not amusement, though it was in the neighborhood, something more like grief that had forgotten how to be anything but hard. "You've been opening drinks," she said slowly, "with the only key in the galaxy to something the Concord has burned worlds to keep buried. That is the single reason you are breathing. And that," she added, before I could ask the obvious thing, "is only half the problem, because that key is locked, junk man, and I can't open it either. Deep space, it turns out, is mostly waiting. Nobody tells you that. The stories are all chases and duels and worlds on fire, and nobody mentions the long gray middle where you're strapped into somebody's warship eating a ration bar that tastes of cardboard and regret, watching a red-skinned legend not talk to you for 6 straight hours because she's decided you're a problem she'll solve later. I spent the first stretch of it taking inventory. This is what I do when I'm frightened. I catalog things, the way other men pray. The Nightjar had a galley the size of a coffin, a hold that could have fit my entire apartment twice and would have been a nicer place to live, and an AI that narrated my every movement with the weary patience of a butler watching a raccoon get into the good silver. "He's touching the coolant conduit," the ship observed, to no one. "I'm not touching it. I'm looking at it. Appreciatively." "He's appreciating the coolant conduit. Scarlett, the cargo has feelings about the plumbing. Should I be concerned?" She came aft eventually, because you can only avoid one person on a small ship for so long before the ship itself starts making it awkward. She dropped onto the bench across from me, set down 2 cups of something that steamed and actually smelled like a thing a human might drink on purpose, and slid one across. a peace offering, or maybe just fuel. With her, it was hard to tell the difference. I suspected she found the distinction sentimental. "Ask," she said. "You've been generating questions like a reactor generates heat. Ask them before you cook yourself." So I lifted the shard again, the bottle opener, the garbage, the reason for all of this, and let it turn on its cord. "Start here. What is it, really?" She looked at it for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its edge, gone quiet and even, the way people get when they've told a story so many times inside their own head that saying it aloud is almost a relief. "It's called the ledger. There's one. Just the one. It holds the coordinates and the defense grid, the whole architecture, of a place the Concord has spent a decade pretending doesn't exist." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "My homeworld had a name. It doesn't need one now. There's nothing left to call. The Concord came for the ore under our cities, and when we said no, they came harder. And when the fighting stopped, there was no world and no fight, just the survivors, my clan, loaded into holds like cargo and taken somewhere deep and dark and off every chart, to work the mines that killed the planet we were standing on when it was still ours." I'd stopped drinking. The cup was warm in my hands, and I'd forgotten it entirely. "Slaves," I said. "They don't use the word. They have cleaner words, assets, labor liability, detained populations." Her mouth twisted. "My sister is in there, Mila. She was 14 when they took her. She'll be 19 now if she's—" She stopped. Restarted. Harder. "The ledger is the only way in. The only map to a place with no address. And someone smuggled it out, world to world, dying man to dying man, until it ended up around the neck of a scrap hauler using it to open beer. I would like to report that I said something wise. What I actually did was set my cup down very carefully, the way you set down something after you've realized how much heavier it was than you thought, and say, 'I've been opening my drinks with your sister,' and she laughed. It caught her by surprise. I saw it hit her, the way a laugh does when you haven't let one out in far too long, cracking through all that hard-won stone. It changed her whole face. For 1 second she wasn't a warlord. She was just a tired woman in her 20s who'd been running so hard for so long she'd forgotten laughing was a thing bodies did. "You have," she said. "You absolutely have. The most secure object in 3 systems, and you've been prying caps off it. In fairness, it has a great edge. I'm going to need you to never say that again." The warmth of it sat between us, unfamiliar and welcome, and in it I finally understood the shape of the whole terrible thing. "So the warlord," I said gently. "The name nobody says, the reason bounty hunters retire." The laugh drained out of her. "The Concord made that. You bury a crime by pointing everyone at a monster. So they built one. Painted me across every screen in the galaxy. Scarlett, the butcher, burner of worlds, and set every hunter in 3 systems chasing the story so not one of them would ever stop and ask the boring question." She met my eyes. "Where does the cheap ore come from? Who's down in the dark digging it? Nobody hunts a bookkeeper. Everybody hunts a devil. So I became the devil, because a devil can go where a grieving sister can't, and I let them fear me, because fear buys room to move." She looked down at her hands. "I've never burned a world. I'm the only person alive still trying to unburn one." I looked at her. Really looked. Past the red skin and the swept-back ears and the legend they'd hung on her like a costume. And something in my chest reorganized itself quietly and without my permission. "Then let's open it," I said. "Point me at the map. I open things. It's genuinely my one skill." "That's the second problem." She took the shard from my palm, her fingers cool against mine, and turned it to the light. "It's encrypted. Deep, Conquered military grade. The kind that isn't meant to be broken, only surrendered to. I've had it 11 days, and I can't so much as make it blink. We need a decryptionist. A real one, and there's maybe one left alive who'd dare touch Concord cipher work." The console up front chimed. Once. A soft, polite, catastrophic little sound. The nightjar's voice came back, and all the dry amusement had gone out of it. "Ah," it said. "I do hate to interrupt the bonding, but we've picked up a tail. A ship running dark, matched to our fold signature 3 jumps back." A pause. It's flagged in my records. Scarlett, it's Axel. I watched every bit of color that red skin could lose itself. How? She whispered. He's very good, the ship said quietly. You did tell me that yourself. The one decryptionist left alive who'd touched conquered cipher work lived on a rock called Threnody, which is a terrible name for a place you're hoping to leave. It was a hollowed-out moon, a smuggler's warren bored through cold stone, and it had exactly the population you'd expect of anywhere that named itself after a funeral song. We came in dark and slow, with Axel somewhere behind us in the black, close enough now that the nightjar had stopped making jokes about it, which frightened me more than the fact itself. Tell me about him, I said on the way down. Axel, you went a color I didn't know you had. Scarlett didn't look up from the controls. We were the same once, same world. He got out before it burned, took the Concord's coin, put on their gray, and told himself it was the sensible thing. Now he hunts the very people he grew up with, and he's the best they've got because nobody knows how a hunted thing thinks like something that used to be hunted itself. Her jaw worked. He's chased me for 4 years. He's the only one who's ever come close. And the worst part, she finally glanced at me, is that I don't think he even wants the bounty. I think he wants me to stop, to come in. He thinks he's saving me. From what? From this. From the hoping. She said, hoping like it was a bad habit she couldn't quit. The decryptionist turned out to be a small, elderly, alarmingly cheerful person named Cora, who ran a shop full of dead tech and lived on tea and spite. She took one look at the ledger and her whole face changed, the way a doctor's face changes when the X-ray is worse than they let on. Oh, sweetheart, she said. Where did you get this? Can you open it? Scarlett said. Can I? Yes. Should you be within a parsec of it? No. Cora carried it to a bench and hooked it into a nest of ancient readers with hands that didn't shake despite her years. This is a Concord vault key. You don't just crack these, they phone home. The moment I so much as breathe on the outer cipher, it'll try to scream your position to every gray ship in range, which means I can open it. But the instant I do, everyone who's looking for you will know exactly where you're standing. She looked up, bright-eyed and grim. So, how badly do you want it, and how fast can you run? He's already here, I said. So, now seems fine. Cora grinned like I'd said something delightful, cracked her knuckles, and went to work, and the little shop filled with the hum of very old machines doing something very illegal. It took an hour. It felt like a year. Scarlett and I stood a few feet apart in the cramped shop, and in the enforced stillness of waiting, the strangest thing happened. We talked. Not about the mission, about stupid things. She asked what a person did, hauling scrap, and I told her the honest truth, which is that mostly you find out what people were before they died. A ship is a biography, if you read it right. The modifications tell you their dreams, and the repairs tell you their fears. She went quiet at that, and then said that in her whole life, no one had ever asked her what she'd been before, only what she'd become. I said, So what were you? And she said, after a while, so softly I nearly missed it. Somebody's older sister. That's the whole of it. Everything else is a costume I put on to get her back. And I realized I would have walked into that dark hold with her if she'd asked me right then. Not because I was cargo, not because I was trapped, because I wanted to be the person who helped her take the costume off. Got it, Cora announced. The ledger blinked awake, a soft, living blue, and Scarlett crossed the shop in 2 strides to look, and the coordinates unfolded in the air between us, a whole architecture of a place with no name, defense grids and patrol lanes, and, at the black heart of it, the holding levels. Real. There. Findable. That was, of course, exactly when the shop's proximity alarm went off. Cora's face fell. That's a Concord signature at my dock. 1 ship. She looked at Scarlett almost apologetically. "It phoned home, love. I told you it would." The door didn't burst open. That's what I remember. It opened quietly, and a man walked in wearing clean Concord gray, unhurried, a pistol held down at his side like he wasn't sure he'd need it. He was broad and calm, and his eyes went straight to Scarlett and stayed there, and something passed between them that had 4 years of history folded inside it. "Scarlett," Axel said. He sounded tired. He sounded, God help me, kind. "You look terrible. When did you last sleep?" "Axel, come in with me, just stop. I can make it end. No hold, no digging, no dying in the dark chasing a girl who's probably already—" "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you say she's gone. You of all people." For a moment nobody moved. Then Axel's gaze slid to the glowing ledger, and to me, holding its cord, and I watched the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. Watched him understand that the key was real, that the map was open, that she was one raid away from proving the whole galaxy's monster was him and his face changed. The kindness closed like a door. "I can't let you leave with that," he said, and raised the pistol. What happened next happened in about 4 seconds and cost us badly. Cora shoved a bench over. Old woman, surprising strength, and the plasma bolt meant for Scarlett burned through it and through Cora instead, and she went down without a sound. Scarlett was already moving, already firing, already dragging me toward the shop's back crawl while I grabbed the ledger off the bench, and we went out through the guts of Threnody into the dark with Cora dead behind us, and the map alive in my fist and Axel's voice echoing down the stone after us. No longer kind at all. We fell into the nightjar, bruised and bloodied, and one friend poorer. Scarlett didn't speak until we were folded away into empty space. Then she sat and put her face in her hands, and I did the only thing I could think of. I sat beside her, close, and I didn't say anything clever, for once in my entire life. "We finish it," she said finally, into her palms. "We go to the deep hold, we free them all, and we don't just take her back." She lowered her hands, and her eyes were wet and absolutely certain. "We broadcast this, every system, all at once. We show them where their cheap ore comes from. We make it so they can never bury it again." She looked at me. "Are you with me, Junkman? All the way in?" "All the way in," I said. And I meant it more than I'd meant anything. The deep hold was not a place so much as a wound the Concorde had bored into the crust of a dead moon, and then pretended it had never made. No stars near it, no traffic lanes. Just a black rock in a black nowhere, and inside it, according to the map that had once opened my beer, 31 levels of people the galaxy had been told didn't exist. The plan was mine, mostly, which should have frightened everyone. But it turned out a lifetime of hauling scrap teaches you exactly one useful thing. Every big, proud, expensive machine has a humble little servant's entrance where the trash goes out, and nobody important ever guards the trash. The deep hold vented its spent reactor coolant through a shaft on its dark side, a shaft too small and too filthy for anyone to imagine a threat coming up it. We came up it. The nightjar dropped us at the mouth and slunk off to wait, deeply unimpressed. "I want it on record," the ship said in our ears, "that I have gone from prestige warship to getaway vehicle for 2 people about to climb a sewer." My designers wept. "You love us," I whispered. "I tolerate you at an increasingly alarming volume. Go, and do try to come back." We went up through the guts of the place, Scarlett ahead of me, silent and precise, a woman moving through a nightmare she'd rehearsed 10,000 times in the dark behind her eyes. And for a while it worked. We came out into the low levels, and it was worse than she'd said. Long stone galleries, dim and cold, and in them people. Her people. Gray-faced and thin and moving with the flat economy of the endlessly exhausted, and the sound of digging somewhere below like the moon itself had a heartbeat, and it was slow. I watched Scarlett see it. I watched what it did to her. And I watched her put it away, all of it, into that place she kept things, because there was work to do and grief could wait its turn. We got the ledger into a data port and started the broadcast climbing. Every system, all at once, the whole architecture of the crime rooting itself out to 1,000 screens that had been told a comfortable lie. And we started opening cells. That was the plan. Open everything. Wake everyone. And in the chaos of 1,000 freed prisoners, walk out with the truth going out ahead of us, like a flood. It went sideways, because it always goes sideways. And it went sideways in the shape of a girl. Scarlett found her on the 4th level we opened. A thin young woman with red skin and long tapered ears, and eyes exactly like Scarlett's, older than 14 now, harder than 14, and for a second neither of them could do anything at all. Then Mila said her sister's name like a question she'd stopped letting herself ask, and Scarlett made a sound I hope to never hear again, half a sob and half a laugh. And the warlord who 3 systems feared went to her knees on the cold stone and held her sister and shook. I stood guard. I gave them the second. It was the least and the most I could do. The second ended when the gallery lights changed, went from dim to a hard, waking red, and Axel's voice came over every speaker in the deep hold at once, calm and everywhere. The broadcast's already out, Scarlett. I know, you've won that part. There's nothing left down here for you, but to leave alive. A pause. So leave. Bring me the ledger and walk. Or don't, and I'll take it off what's left of you. Your choice. It always was. He came through the far archway with a dozen gray behind him, and the freed miners scattered, and it should have been the end. He was better than her. She'd told me so herself. 4 years of chasing, and he'd always been half a step better. And now he had numbers, and ground, and the exit at his back. But here is the thing about being the most valuable piece of salvage in the galaxy. You spend a lot of time thinking about salvage, and I'd spent the whole climb up that filthy shaft reading the deep hold the way I read a dead ship, the modifications for their dreams, the repairs for their fears, and the Concord's great fear written all over that reactor was the coolant. The same coolant that vented out the humble little shaft nobody guarded. They'd overbuilt the venting because a breach in a place this deep, this sealed, would flash the whole lower works into a fog of coolant and pressure, and there'd be no fighting in it, no seeing in it, only running. I didn't outshoot Axel. I could never have outshot Axel. I hit the emergency purge on the reactor gallery I'd walked past on the way in, the big red servant's entrance handle that every proud machine has and nobody important ever thinks about. And the deep hold vented its own guts into its own halls, the galleries filled with roaring white fog. Every alarm the moon owned went off at once. The gray uniforms, who knew exactly what that meant, did the only sane thing and ran for their lives. And in the blind, screaming chaos of it, I grabbed Scarlett's arm and she grabbed Mila's, and we went, not up, down, toward the trash, toward the humble shaft, the way out that only a scrap hauler would ever have thought to love. Axel found us at the shaft mouth. Of course he did. He came out of the fog alone, pistol up, and for one frozen second, he had all 3 of us cold. And Scarlett stepped in front of her sister, and in front of me, and said, not a threat, not a taunt, just quiet and true. It's already out, Axel. Every screen in the galaxy. You can shoot me here in the dark, but you can't untell it. They know now. So who are you going to be when the fog clears? The man who buried it, or the man who let one grieving sister go? And I watched 4 years of chasing sit on his face, and behind it a whole homeworld that burned, and something in him that used to be hunted look at something in her that still was. His arm did not lower, but it did not fire either. It shook. Go, Axel said at last, through his teeth, like the word cost him a limb. Before the fog clears, and I remember what I am. We went down the shaft into the dark, 3 of us alive, the truth already loose in 1,000 systems above, and behind us, at the mouth of the trash shaft, The Concorde's best hunter stood alone in the settling fog and let us live. The truth, once it's loose, moves faster than any ship. We watched it happen from the Nightjar's deck over the following days, the way you'd watch a fire cross a dry field, every screen in 1,000 systems carrying the same footage, the black rock, the cold galleries, the gray-faced people digging the ore that made everyone else's lives cheap and comfortable. There is no untelling a thing like that. The Concorde tried. They called it fabrication, then called it necessary, then called it complicated. And each new lie only proved the last, until the whole gray edifice began to come apart under the simple, unbearable weight of people finally asking the boring question, where does it come from? Who's down there in the dark? Nobody hunts a bookkeeper. But a whole galaxy, it turns out, will absolutely hunt the ones who built the hold. They opened the deep hold within the month. Not us, the systems themselves. An outraged flotilla of every world that had bought the lie, cracking that dead moon open and bringing 31 levels of people up into starlight for the first time in a decade. I heard the reactor gallery still had a purge handle hanging open where a scrap hauler had left it. I chose to be proud of that. And Scarlett, the name 3 systems couldn't sleep for, turned inside out overnight. That's the thing about a costume. Once everyone sees the seams, it stops being a face and starts being a coat you can finally take off. The butcher, the burner of worlds, became, in the space of one broadcast, the woman who'd carried the truth out of the dark on her back. They put her face on the same screens that had once whispered her like a curse, and now they said it differently. Not fear, something closer to apology. She hated it a little. I liked being feared, she admitted one evening, watching her own face say something noble on a news feed. Fear was simple. Fear kept people at a distance. And now? Now people want to thank me. It's exhausting. They keep trying to shake my hand. She said it like a genuine grievance. One of them cried. On me. I didn't know what to do with my arms. You put them around the person. That's the standard configuration. Disgusting, she said, and almost smiled, and did not entirely move away from where I was sitting. Mila healed slowly, the way you'd expect of a girl who went into the dark at 14 and came out at 19. But she healed. She had her sister's steel and none of the costume, and she took to the Nightjar's galley like she'd been born there. And within a fortnight, she and the ship were running a 2-front campaign of relentless commentary that made my life a delightful misery. The cargo is touching the conduit again, the Nightjar reported. He does that, Mila said. I think it's a nervous condition. I am appreciating the plumbing, I said with dignity. It is a coping mechanism. It came free with everything else. And Axel, because loose threads deserve their ending too, surfaced once more, months later, in a message routed through 3 dead relays so it couldn't be traced. No gray uniform in it. Just a man on some unnamed dock, looking older and lighter both. He didn't apologize. He wasn't the type. And Cora's death sat between him and Scarlett in a way that no message could move. But he told her he'd walked away from the Concorde the day the fog cleared, that he was helping resettle the freed the only way he knew how, quiet and thorough, and that he'd finally stopped chasing anyone at all. He said one more thing at the end to Scarlett. You were right about who I'd rather be. That's all. She watched it twice, and then deleted it, and stood at the viewport for a long while. And when she came back, her eyes were dry, and something old in her had, at last, set down its weight. As for me, I'd like to tell you the journey made me brave, or noble, or the sort of man legends get written about. It didn't. I'm still the man who owed money to 4 people, though the debts feel very far away now, and I still catalog things when I'm frightened, and I still can't keep my mouth from making everything worse. But something did change, and it took me a while to find the word for it. For my whole life, I'd been salvage, a thing that used to belong to something, drifting, waiting to be scrapped for parts. I'd read 1,000 dead ships and never once imagined being read myself. And somewhere between a docking clamp failing and a purge handle pulling, I'd become a person who was chosen. Not cargo, not the most valuable piece of salvage in the galaxy. Just wanted. It turns out that's the whole difference between drifting and going somewhere. Someone to go with. We stood on the deck the night it truly ended. The three of us and one insufferable ship with nowhere in particular to be for the first time in either of our lives. The galaxy had its truth. The hold was empty. The costume was off. Mila had gone to sleep in a bed that locked from the inside, which is its own kind of miracle. And Scarlett stood beside me at the viewport, red skin soft in the starlight, long ears swept back, looking out at all that enormous indifferent black that no longer had anyone in it hunting her. "So," I said, "what does the most feared woman in the galaxy do, now that she isn't?" She was quiet a moment. Then she reached over, without looking, and took the dull gray shard off its cord around my neck. The ledger, the map, the bottle opener, the reason for all of it, and turned it in the light. Its work was done. It was just junk again now. And junk was, after all, my whole native language. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like to find out what I was before the costume. You asked me once, and I didn't have an answer past somebody's sister." She turned to face me, and there was no threat in it at all. None. Only that thing I'd first seen on the deck of the Veil Andara and never forgotten, the look of someone caught. "I think I'd like to find out with you, if the junkman's got room in his very small, very indebted life for one more piece of salvage." I looked at her, past the red skin and the long ears and the legend they'd hung on her, and she'd finally shrugged off, and my chest did that quiet reorganizing thing one final time. And stayed that way. For good. "There's always room," I said. "I've got a coat full of pockets, and nothing worth putting in them." I took the shard back from her fingers and let it fall, and it clinked somewhere in the dark of the deck, unimportant at last. "Besides, you fell into my lap. Galactic law's very clear on this. Finders keepers." She laughed. "The real one. The one that cracked all the way through the stone and let the light in." And the ship groaned that it was going to be violently unwell, and Mila's voice drifted sleepily up from below, telling us both to keep it down, and the four of us went on together into all that patient black, no longer running from anything, with the whole unwritten rest of it ahead. The end. We've reached the end of Scarlett and Lucas's story, friends. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next science fiction story. See you in the next episode. Goodbye, friends.